morning, everyone. Since yesterday, we have been engaged with a variety of, issues, more focused on arts, folk, performances, cinema, so on and so forth. And I see in this, quite a bit of political, not in the sense in which we generally talk about politics. I think in whatever we do, whether it is art or literature or a proper, political theory, I think there is something political very deeply. Yesterday, when Sambhaji spoke about, his own experience in the morning, I think it was very deeply political, I thought. So I think that I am not out of place, although I'm not a student of literature, or nor I am a student of arts and so on. But I think I'm always very keen in understanding and observing what's happening, in terms of artistic and literary expressions. So therefore I'm pretty happy to be here, and I think I should personally thank three people. Kanaka, whom I know, in the sense I know what she is and what she is doing, although I have not met her very frequently. I have for the first time met Vishnu, and I'm really quite happy that I have met him, because I found him personally very humane, kind, and all that. And I should be thankful to Kriti, not only that she introduced me, but also that she was the person responsible for bringing me over here. So with this personal note, let me talk about Nehru. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Initially, I thought I would, since I'm a teacher of political theory and modern Indian political thought, I would go a little systematic. Although I myself is not very systematic, but I tried to be one. I'm an odd political science student, so to speak. But let me, I thought, initially that I would actually present some kind of a systematic presentation. But after coming here, after seeing people like you, who are very deeply engaged with whatever you are doing, I thought I should actually change my methodology. Although I would be speaking of Nehru, I would be speaking of some of his very central concerns, I would not go that systematically. I thought that I would speak about Nehru's nationalism, Nehru's democracy, Nehru's very distinct kind of secularism that Nehru represented, and finally, Nehru's internationalism, non-alignment, peace, and all that. But I would, of course, touch all of them, but not in the way, I would generally, do it in the class, since I don't think I should consider this a class. It's a dialogue. And another thing, that I think I should make mention of this, festival of dialogues. That I think there are two things, festival, and dialogue. Both are very important, and I think, therefore, it's not I speak and you listen. I think initially I would make some, important remarks, and then, you respond to that. We will have a discussion. 20 to 30 minutes I will speak, and then, another 30 minutes we can have discussion. Because I think dialogue is the core of democracy. All those, people who are conversant with democracy know that dialogue is the core of democracy. Because democracy represents a very distinctive idea of truth, which is to be constituted and reconstituted through dialogue. And therefore, this is a dialogue. And this is a festival of dialogue. Because we are, Indians, we are very, festivity oriented. Therefore, we make democracy also a festival. Our elections are actually secular festivals. So I think with this note, I would actually get into Nehru. It's remembering Nehru. I think today we need to remember Nehru very fondly. Not only because what he thought, but also because what he did. Nehru is a very important thinker, and to my mind, one of those very few thinkers in India who had a very nuanced idea of whatever he proposed, whatever he represented, whether it is nationalism, whether it is democracy or secularism. We will get into those things a little later. So I think it's very important that we should think about Nehru, talk about Nehru, reconstruct Nehru, remember him in terms of what he thought, and at the same time in terms of what he did, which is more important today. Given the kind of animosity, given the kind of hatred, given the kind of bad taste that we are showing towards him. Now, who is Nehru? Most of us are familiar with Hindi cinema. I am a great fan of Hindi cinema, particularly of the 50s and the 60s. Dilip Kumar, Raj Kapoor. And whenever I see those, 50s and 60s cinemas, I see Nehru everywhere. Not only because in some shot, there is a Nehru photo, but because, the kind of things that are proposed, the kind of songs that are sung. तू हिंदू नहीं है, मुसलमान नहीं है, इंसान के औलाद है, इंसान बनेगा. That's the kind of secularism that Nehru represented. So I think whether it is Dilip Kumar making a kind of a statement in Naya Daur, which actually struck me very significantly as very Nehruian, because he says, modernity is good, but then modernity should have also the humanistic, dimensions. So that kind of Nehru, we have seen. So therefore, at least to someone like me of my age, I think Nehru is a zamana. Nehru is a huge dream. Nehru is something that all of us, I would rather say, at least at that time, during the 50s, and I was just growing up, the latest part of the 60s, I think it's a zamana, it's an aspiration. It's something that we want to achieve. So Nehru represents all those that we want to achieve. Having said that, let me also make another note in between. As I said, I am not very systematic. Since most of you are people from literature and arts, I think Nehru is a great writer. Professor Vinay Lal, who is an important Nehru scholar, a historian, talks about Nehru's writings, the Nehru style, whether it is Discovery of India or Glimpses of World History. So it's very important that Nehru occupies a place, in the company of large number of writers. So that part is also very, very important. Nehru as a man of literature, a man of taste. Nehru as a writer. That part is also something that we need to remember when we talk about large number of Nehru's ideas and pursuits. Now let me first of all concentrate on nationalism, because that's very important. We are in an age where we think that nationalism is somebody else's patent. Hindutva, begins to say that, that is nationalism. Then that's the only kind of nationalism. And that if you don't accept that kind of nationalism, you are a deshdrohi. Now, I think we need to contest this. Not only that Nehru represented, a very different kind of nationalism. There are also others. When we talk about Nehru, Nehru actually, gives us a space to talk about others as well. For example, Ram Manohar Lohia. Ram Manohar Lohia is my, research area. I have worked on socialist politics. Ram Manohar Lohia represented another kind of nationalism, which is more akin to the Nehruvian kind of nationalism. Although subsequently, in terms of post-independent India's politics, Nehru and Lohia were, I think, loggerheads. That's a different matter, and that's not important for us today. Yeah. Now, just as Ambedkar critiqued Gandhi, which is very important, but it's not important for us today. I think we need to bring Gandhi and Ambedkar together. How? Someone like Sambhaji should tell us. Now, nationalism. I think Nehru represented a very nuanced idea of nationalism, a very distinct, idea of nationalism. I think deeply embedded in the idea of India's diversity. We all know that unity in diversity is the phrase that Nehru coined, and Nehru really believed, in that. It is not only a phrase, I think it's a conceptual idea, that, unity is something that we have to establish. Diversity is something that's already there. How are we going to organize this diversity into a reasonable unity through a democratic process? Is actually Nehru's nationalism. It's not chauvinism. It is patriotism of a very distinct kind, but not the kind of patriotism that we see today. I think a patriotism that is informed by diversity of India, cultural, linguistic, regional, caste, and so on and so forth. So a great deal of awareness to the diversity of India, and also an awareness to the problems of that diversity. The kind of inequality that might come up in terms of that diversity. So how to work out your way as a new nation, as a modern nation, is actually Nehru's problematic of nationalism. So nationalism is an ideal, yes, but nationalism is also a task. How are you going to do it? Are you including everybody into it, or are you excluding people from it? So therefore, to Nehru, nationalism is not an isolated idea, a separate idea. It is an idea closely linked to democracy. We all agreed with Nehru, and there is a whole lot of, I think, leadership during the 30s and the 40s, which believed that democracy is going to be our natural option. Of course, people like Ambedkar, people like Nehru, people like Rajendra Prasad have worked on, that in actually evolving a democratic, secular constitution for us. But democracy was a kind of a consensus. Democracy was a subsumed idea in the nationalist movement. And Nehru actually, in post-independent India, actually articulated an institutional, processorial, and normative framework to that with a large number of others. So the link between nationalism and democracy, I think, is very central to a Nehruvian perspective of modern India. It's not only a modern India. I think it's an India in a larger community of nations. So I think that internationalism which I was talking to you, I think is very important. And Professor Sudipto Kaviraj, some of you might know about him, actually writes about this. Basically going into the three major texts of Nehru: Glimpses of World History, Discovery of India, and Autobiography. That's how Nehru is, a larger world within which nation is located, from within which the self is located. So it is, an encompassing kind of a, universe that Nehru was envisaging. So there is a self which is located within a nation, and there is a nation which is located in the larger community of nations. So I think Nehru is one of those most important internationalist scholars, because I tend to use this word internationalism. One can use this word cosmopolitanism, because my research on Lohia tells me, that cosmopolitanism is a little elitist. And Lohia wanted to use this word internationalism rather than cosmopolitanism. So I would therefore, would like to say that Nehru is basically an internationalist. To him, India's prospects, India's development, a problematic word today, India's democracy, India's future lies also in how it envisages itself in the larger community of nations. So there is that larger universal internationalist perspective in Nehru, from within which he locates his nation and talks about his nation in Discovery of India. And let me tell you, I reread Discovery of India, and also I revisited Shambengal's Bharat-e-Kuch, and I think Nehru gives us an absolutely nuanced idea of India. This I should say, very emphatically, because, since I was some kind of a Lohia admirer, I have always seen as Nehru as a kind of undesirable kind of but I think I have changed my position, very drastically in the last 10 years. And I think, that Nehru is as culturally sensitive as any other thinker in India. Think of any other thinker. So what is the kind of India that Nehru provides us, that Nehru actually represents through Discovery of India? I think it's basically a very culturally embedded India. Take any part of Discovery of India. You can see Bharat-e-Kuch. It's a wonderful reproduction rather, or reconstruction, you can say, of Discovery of India. You see cultural India. Very radically reinterpreted cultural India. Nehru talks about Ramayana through Pratima, a play that Basa writes, and brings out certain very radical things that we today talk about. Whether it is on the question of citizenship, whether it is whether it is on the question of citizenship, whether it is on the question of who are migrants. I mean, this is how I look at the whole thing. Yeah. And I think he highlights very secular kinds of icons. Like Ashoka, we all know that. Ashoka is a great icon of Nehru. Meera, Bhakti movement. Yeah, Panchsheel, of course, is the philosophical substance of, very important that you raised that Panchsheel. So I think it's cultural India. Now I'm emphasizing this point precisely to say that it is necessary and it is possible to reconceptualize the cultural universe of India without the help of Savarkars and Golwalkars. There is a very different kind of cultural universe of India possible. You can imagine it through, someone like Nehru, someone like Ambedkar, someone like Lohia. So therefore, whether culture or history or anything, I think it doesn't belong to the right-wing politics in India, as they claim. I think we need to it's they who are trying to rewrite history. I think we need to rewrite the rewritten history which they have, trying to put forward. So, what is it that I'm trying to highlight? I'm saying that Nehru is a critical nationalist, very deeply culturally embedded, but at the same time, he did not uphold a cultural nationalism of the kind that we are familiar with now. So there is a difference between being sensitive to culture and becoming a cultural nationalist. A lot of our nationalist leaders who are on the other side of the right, have always conceived India as a cultural entity, but they have not fallen into the trap of, a very dogmatic, very parochial, cultural nationalism. So, what is the crux of that point, that I'm talking about? Nationalism, For Nehru, nationalism is people. People are the nation. This comes in the beginning of discovery of India. Nation is constituted by people, and therefore people are important. And therefore democracy is important. So, it is in terms of that inextricable relationship between nationalism and democracy, Nehru pursued democracy, envisioned democracy, along with a large number of others. We may not say, or we need not say, that Nehru is a great theorist. Maybe there are better theorists than Nehru on democracy. Ambedkar is one, obviously. Lohia is another, to my mind. And there are many of them. But Nehru should be remembered not so much for his democratic theory, but for what he did as the Prime Minister of India, as the head of the state after India's independence. Tried to provide processes, tried to provide conventions, establish conventions, tried to provide and strengthen institutions. Indian Constitution itself is partly a product of, although Ambedkar is the architect, of the Constitution, but then, Nehru has contributed a great, the idea of a parliamentary democracy, which all the three most important persons, on preparing the draft of the Indian Constitution, Ambedkar, Nehru and Rajendra Prasad, a lot of experts on the Constitution, Indian Constitution, say that these are the three, most instrumental figures in preparing the Indian Constitution. I think Nehru was one of those most important persons who said that India should be a parliamentary democracy, because there was quite a significant academic, scholarly, profound voice about, a presidential form of government. All this is part of a, debate about, about which we are all familiar. But then Nehru was the one, along with Ambedkar and Prasad, that we should be a parliamentary democracy, because parliamentary democracy is a most representative kind of democracy, and this is the kind of democracy that fits into the diversity of India. So how to retain, how to sustain, how to evolve, how to strengthen, how to consolidate, parliamentary democracy. Nehru precisely, in the 2 decades of India's independence, tried to develop some of those things which we don't, take very seriously today. This is one example which I wanted to give, that every time Nehru went out for a foreign trip, he would first of all meet the president and brief him as to why he's going and what is the agenda. And then press conference. And then goes to the foreign visit, comes back, and again meets the president and a press conference. And we know for the last 10 years, the Prime Minister has never had a press conference. Okay. That's not my intention. I am not. I want to critique, but then this is not the, because I want to talk to Nehru and don't waste my time on Modi. Okay, so that's so the processes, how to build institutions which would actually sustain democracy. There are so many episodes that I can, anecdotes and episodes, that I can talk about. But I don't, the way that he would treat opposition, the level of debates in the parliament, we all talk about that golden age of Indian parliament. I don't want to use that word. I have my problems with that. But then, parliament was actually a debating house. There were great debaters, N.G. Ranga, Pilu Modi. I wanted to mention Pilu Modi because we have forgotten, we know the other Modi. We do not know Pilu Modi. Pilu Modi was a great parliamentarian. Jyotirmai Basu. Yeah, there are so many of them. So that was the kind of democracy, discussions, debates, opposition, great deal of opposition. Let me quickly add another anecdote because, Acharya Narendra Deva, a socialist leader, stood for election in Uttar Pradesh, in Vidhan Sabha election. And he was in the Socialist Party. And Congress Party candidate called Nehru. Acharya Narendra Dev ji is standing, and I am really frightened, and you should come and campaign. Nehru said, first of all, a Prime Minister shall not campaign in a Vidhan Sabha election, that too in a by-election. Secondly, I want Narendra Deva to be in the house and not you. I mean, this is Nehru. Now, that is the spirit of democracy. And I will not further, extend, what I'm trying to highlight is that Nehru is important for us for the kind of processes, institutions, and, public values, that he tried to cherish and generate during his time of democracy. And I'll come to the most important point, secularism. I think if we should remember Nehru today, this is what Nehru also says, that if people remembers me after my death, it's for the kind of secularism that I represent. You might raise 100 objections, theoretical objections, and people have raised, and it's not that it should not be raised. But then, in historical retrospect, this is what my considered opinion. In historical retrospect, I see that through secularism, Nehru was fighting the most important battle of democracy in India. This is evident in terms of the kind of, fight that he had with Rajendra Prasad on the question of, renovation of Somnatha temple. On a large number of questions, what should be the responsibility of a public figure? What is private? We all know the demarcation line between the private and the public, which happens to be the center of discussion in secularism. Politics is public and religion is private. Nehru did not actually argue that kind of secularism at all. Of course, there is a theoretical, ideological, inheritance of secularism which begins to talk about this distinction between private and public. But Nehru was arguing for a feasible, a pragmatic, a practical possible distinction between private and the public, which is necessary, for any kind of pursuit of secularism. So he was therefore insisting that Rajendra Prasad, you might have your belief, but then as the head of the Indian state, you should not go and inaugurate Somnatha temple, or you should not go to Benares and bow before the Brahmins. These are the two major controversies. So I think today, that we need to have, if at all you talk about secularism, you need to have this nuanced distinction. It's not a crude distinction. It's not a hard distinction between public and the private. But then there has to be a nuanced distinction between the private and the public. That's precisely the point that Nehru was trying to argue. So Nehru was more about the practicality of applying a secular perspective. There is a secular vision in Nehru, there is a secular theory in Nehru in that sense. But then he was, in fact, articulating the ways in which that theory can be, brought into practice in the contradictory context in India. And when we make any kind of assessment, on Nehru, that we need to understand that Nehru was the head of the state, and that he had all the compulsions, all the challenges, as the head of the state. Now, what is secularism? Nehru left it, for us to define. Of course, there is a debate in the Constituent Assembly about secularism, not in the name of secularism, but about religious freedom, about religious identity. And Nehru believed, that it is necessary that the religious, cultural identities of people, should be protected and promoted, and at the same time, the secular space of the state, need to be retained. I mean, Rajiv Bhargav, one of the best scholars on secularism in India, talks about this distinctive secularism that Nehru represented. It is not neutrality. It is actually what he calls as principled distance. Indian state maintains what he calls as the principled distance. It's not, equality, equal distance, Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs, but then depending upon what is the community, in contention, what is the problem in contention, Indian state would evolve, and it is a normative stance. It is not saying neutral, It's not talking about neutral. It is talking about a normative position that the state has to take vis-a-vis a conflict or a contradiction, between two religious communities. So what is the kind of secularism that Nehru tried to propose then? I think as the head of the state, he had two tasks to perform. As the head of the state, he was trying to develop a very clear, theoretically clear theory of what is called as political secularism. The responsibility of the state in the context of multi-religious society like India. So political secularism, the responsibility of the state. And there is also the civic secularism, the kind of secularism that people like us, should pursue. And this is the kind of secularism about which Akhil Bilgrami writes a great deal. Now, therefore, I think the greatest battle that we have to fight today, I mean, it's about Dalit emancipation, it's about women emancipation, I mean, it's about all that. I think the battle for secularism, I think in a way represents all that, different kinds of battles we are fighting every day. So I think Nehru and secularism is something that we need to bring back to the fore of Indian politics with a great deal of I think commitment about it. Yesterday there was a discussion on spirituality and materiality. I was trying to say yesterday that Nehru's pursuit of secularism is spiritual, because he was so immensely convinced that secularism, in whatever form it is, should be the central thrust of Indian society and politics, and that he tried to pursue that all through his life. There are, of course, areas of failures, and we can always talk about it. But then that's one thing, which is not merely a political theory, but also, a social perspective. That's what, civic secularism is all about. If society is not secular, how can state be secular? If society is not tolerant, how can state be tolerant? If society is not democratic, how can state be democratic? So I think that is the kind of modernity, that's the kind of modernity that Nehru, he thought that, it is only through, a very humanistic modernity that, we can achieve whatever we wanted to. Now, of course, at the later part of his life, he begins to realize some of the problems of modernity, some of the problems of industrialization particularly. The kind of experiments in green revolution and all that. That's fine. I mean, that there is nothing condemnable about it. You realize that at some point in your life, that okay, that's one that I have erred. And Nehru is generous enough, good enough, theoretically open-ended, to accept some of his limitations. And that open-ended democracy, that eagerness to evolve dialogues and to arrive at a collective truth, I think is something which is central to Nehru. Panchshila, yes, Panchshila, we always think that Panchshila is a failure. It's a blunder. India, China, Lohia talks about it but I think, Panchshila is not merely, relations across nations. Panchshila is how we should live our life. Those 5 principles are central principles of meaningful human existence. Mutual respect for each other, for instance. Listen to it, even if you disagree, you better listen. Don't interfere unnecessarily in some others, affairs. I mean, these are certain things which are, I think, very, very central to any meaningful, humanistic, democratic, life. So finally, as if I have not, I have not given you a systematic account, but let me say a last word, that Nehru wanted to introduce a very nuanced idea of modernity and a very nuanced process of modernization, which might have its, very, negative repercussions at points. But then he believed that modernity would take us further. And it's not, it's not sheer technological modernity. I think it's also a very epistemological modernity that Nehru emphasized. That's why, modern education, scientific education, and the kind of institutes, that he established. And that's another thing that I forgot to mention, the kind of scientific institutes that Nehru established, the kind of, education, liberal, secular education, for which, he initiated so many things, UGC. I think, which suggests that, for Nehru, modernity is not merely technology. Read Discovery of India, read Glimpses of World History, read autobiography. I think modernity is always for Nehru a very normative idea. It's about equality. It's about liberty. It's about justice. So I think what is it that we see in Nehru, and for what that we need to remember Nehru? I think for the libertarian, egalitarian, modernity that he introduced. Libertarian, egalitarian, democratic institutions that he tried to develop. Egalitarian, libertarian, education that he tried to provide for all of us. Maybe I stop here and we can have discussions. Yeah, I'm not an economist. Maybe, I can say something, but I think, we can talk about it. And it's part of his, larger agenda of modernity. Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever you have presented, that is really great. I don't have any question, but I want to just add something.
Yeah, yeah,
So number one, Nehru is a product of Indian freedom movement.
yeah,
That is one very important thing.
yeah.
The dream of martyrs of Indian freedom movements. He has given. You see the Indian Constitution. The first page of Constitution is written by Nehru. That is nobody knows, and that is 21 dreams. That 21 dreams are actually whatever you said. Everything
Yeah.
is it is about that 21 dreams, and now that dreams somebody wants, some forces wants to kill that thing. I am very surprised why such a great philosopher, such a great dreams materialize क्यों नहीं हुए, why it is failed. So without, then I studied it, uh, without democratic revolution, democratic values cannot be evolved. And that is a great problem with Ambedkar, Nehru, and Gandhi, and whatever Rajendra Prasad and other people. The idea of India was given to us after Second World War. The Second World War is a very important thing in this time, at that time. Second World War gives humanity a different outlook. The effect of Second World War was so, harmful. Uh, it has given us very different outlook of humanity. And the Ambedkar, Nehru, Gandhi, and other people was very much influenced by the democratic idea, but without democratic revolution or democratic change, basic change in the material changes, the land relations, production relations, and other things, we just cannot dream about democracy. And in today's context, whatever we see, the right-wing theoreticians and politicians are saying that this is false. India cannot be democratic, India cannot be secular, but they have, what exactly they have done? They have stopped the democratization of the society. They don't want democratic society. Democratization process should be stopped. That is whole idea. So in today's context, whatever you said, the secularism is very, very important principle, and we should fight for that thing. Yeah. We have to fight at any cost. Yeah. We should not stop. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I fully agree with what you are saying. Nehru as the product of the nationalist movement. And actually, I wanted to say that the kind of Nehru that we should be talking about is the 2 decades before independence. Yeah. The kind of Nehru that has evolved as a theorist and a practitioner of politics, and the post-independent Nehru. Those 40 years, I think the way there is also a kind of a transition in Nehru. Yeah. From a very staunch Nehru was a Marxist, a communist, visited Soviet Union several times and was really fascinated by 5-year plans. Is actually the product of that. And that there has to be a certain planning for economic development. So modernization, modernity. Yeah. No, that's true. But then what I'm trying to say is that there is a great deal of transformation that has taken place in Nehru. That transformation is from a very radical Marxist to a very compromising liberal, in the post-independent India. Bipin Chandra, another important historian, begins to talk about that transformation. Early Nehru and the vibrant, radical Nehru, and the later a little softened liberal Nehru. So there is, that transition is, we'll call it transition, transformation, whatever. I think is something that happens in every particularly when you are in the thick of politics. Transformation has taken place in Lohiya, transformation has taken place in Gandhi, Ambedkar. I think that is the mark of a living thinker. I'm not making any critical, evaluation about that transition or transformation. So I think those 20 years, 1920s to 1940s and post-independence, those 40 years, I think Nehru has evolved himself in terms of the actual challenges of politics. Some challenges he might not have, he might have not been succeeded in facing certain challenges. He has succeeded. Today, for example, a lot of people have criticized this. I think Nehru believed that modernity, with the normative kind of emphasis that he had, would actually over a period of time would eliminate caste. And people have criticized for this. Lohiya has criticized, unless you have social movements against it. But now you see, caste is in a certain sense disappearing. I'm not saying it's entirely disappearing, because it is very deep rooted in Indian society, but there is a certain change. There is, intercaste marriages, a lot of, I have seen in my own conservative Brahmin family, a lot of intercaste marriages, a lot of initial opposition, but later people accept for a large number of reasons. So there is something that is taking place through modernity. You get educated, your life gets, uniformed, city life, and there is hardly any difference between, in terms of food and all that. I think certain things that Nehru said, I think, has worked, but certain things have not worked. Maybe a certain overemphasis on scientific technology, and the kind of, absolute belief that Nehru exhibited about science, I think may be problematic. But we should also give concession to Nehru that Nehru did not, during Nehru's time there was no post-colonialism. There was no feminist critique of science. Okay. So I think we should also locate thinkers in terms of their specific context. I think there is hardly any disagreement. Yeah. Yeah.
You said that there was no a critique of science at that time.
Yeah.
But Gandhi himself is a best example for that.
Okay, that's right. But in the academic world, Gandhi's, even Hind Swaraj, the kind of rereading that we make of Hind Swaraj today was not there. We all know that when Hind Swaraj was written, it was not taken very seriously. Nehru had his, terrible comments on Hind Swaraj. Gandhi wanted Nehru to reread that. So Hind Swaraj is quite a mistaken kind of a text. And that kind of a, environmentalist, critique of science is one thing. But the kind of critique of science that we see today in the academic world is quite another. It's not that, science was not, I think science was criticized right from the beginning. That's what is also said of science, because science produces its own critics.
फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल कॉन्ग्रेचुलेसन सर, बहुत बहुत अच्छा स्पीच दिया. मैं आपसे हिंदी में ही सवाल करूंगी.
ठीक है.
क्योंकि आप बीएचयू में रह चुके हैं तो जानते होंगे हिंदी. नॉन एलाइंड मूवमेंट के बारे में मेरा सवाल है, जिसके बारे में आपने बहुत कम बोला. तो जब पर्सनली मुझे जब इराक में सद्दाम हुसैन के साथ जो भी हो रहा था, और हमारे देश में अटल बिहारी वाजपेयी प्राइम मिनिस्टर थे, उन्होंने स्टैंड नहीं लिया, जबकि हम इराक के साथ, हमारा मेसोपोटामिया के साथ सिविलाइजेशन में कितने हजारों साल का एक संबंध था. अभी भी देख रहे हैं हम पैलेस्टीनियन और इजराइल में जो हो रहा है, हमारा देश किसके साथ खड़ा हो गया, पहले तो नहीं था. तो जो नेहरू की भूमिका थी नॉन लैंड मूवमेंट के बारे में, और अब वो बिल्कुल खत्म, मतलब दिखाई ही नहीं दे रही है, उसके बारे में आप थोड़ा सा बताइए.
आपका बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया, बहुत अच्छा प्रश्न है. मैंने पहले कहा था कि नेहरू Nehru saw the entire, Nehru's worldview, I think, is basically internationalist. And that non-alignment is actually a product of that. Nehru cannot simply talk about India on its own terms, unlike Patel. Patel was a typical, Indian, who believed, there is an India-centric perspective in. But Nehru's India was not India-centric. Discovery of India, आप जानते हैं, इतना मतलब. Yeah, very, very different. In fact, Sunil Kilnani, in the idea of India, provides a very, very beautiful, analysis of Nehru's idea of India. Yeah. I think non-alignment, I think, is a great movement. And non-alignment is in keeping with Nehru's idea of democracy. Nehru's idea of, Nehru. Yeah. Indira Gandhi practiced it only the non-alignment part of it. Yeah. But internally, she was, at least for some time, quite undemocratic. Yeah. आप तो emergency के बारे में बात किए थे. Yeah. लेकिन, non-alignment is the crux of Nehru, I think. That's what Nehru is. He will not think about, his community, only his community. He will not think about, his nation, only his nation. He would place India in a larger context. And he believed that India should represent all those normative dimensions that Indian freedom has fought for. And Indian democracy is an expression of, or non-alignment is an expression of Indian democracy and vice versa. So I think in non-alignment is, we generally tend to categorize, non-alignment is Nehru's foreign policy and all that. But I think it is not, it is part of a larger worldview that Nehru represented. It is an expression of the kind of democracy that he represented in India. It's an expression of the kind of secularism that he represented in India. And non-alignment was so powerful, that even during Janata regime, when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the external minister, and there was a lot of talk, that India's ties with Russia will collapse and all that. But that did not happen. Because non-alignment is such a profoundly, theoretically viable and politically important, Indian perspective. So I think if today we have deviated, let's wishfully think that it's only for the time being. I think the future generation, would maybe try to reverse this situation and bring back, those great democratic values, that. So it is, I think, part of the larger world vision. I think that's what Sudipto says. Sudipto says that his idea of the self, his idea of the nation, the idea of the world, they are interconnected. They are encompassing. There is a particular term that he uses. I forget that term. So I think you can't simply talk about Nehru as a Prime Minister of India. You have to talk about Nehru as a larger actor. Yeah. As a larger actor in a larger, and I think of the three, great figures of non-alignment movement, Marshal Tito, Nazar, and Nehru. I think Nehru was the most important, theoretically, to lay down the philosophical foundation of non-alignment. वैसे तो हम इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस के विद्यार्थी नहीं हैं. I don't know whether I have. Yeah.
See, I want to make two observations. Question. One is that it is connected with literature and the literary people. And that's also I add. Not only Nehru was a writer, he's a good prose writer. He is the founder of the democratic institutions of writers, especially Sahitya Academy. In these days, in the contemporary Yeah, first president, first president of Sahitya Academy.
Mm.
It is very important for the writers. It's a literature festival, and also the nowadays the Sahitya Academy is that is almost hijacked. All the academies are hijacked, and Sahitya Academy is little bit not fully hijacked because of the internal rule that there's a parliamentary restrictions are there. The reason was Nehru. The autonomy of Sahitya Academy. I'm talking about the only one Sahitya Academy in Delhi. So we have an academy in Kerala also.
I know.
So this Delhi Sahitya Academy still it is autonomous because they could not make an amendment in Parliament. Otherwise, they already encroached Sangeet Nataka Academy and Lalitakala Academy. Everything they encroached. There is nothing like an autonomy there. But Sahitya Academy is still autonomous. But everyone is very much that lineage towards the RSS and the Sangh Parivar people. But still, technically the autonomy is there just because of the Nehruvian principle. And he is the first president of the Sahitya Academy. And that Nehru, not the Prime Minister Nehru, the president of Sahitya Academy. And he also in the first speech in Sahitya Academy, it is documented also, he insisted the writers, don't invite the Indian political leaders, ministers or political leaders to ask the leaders of the ask the guests or the VIPs in Sahitya Academy. Now I am here just because I am the president of Sahitya Academy. But all this tradition is collapsed later. In Kerala, you know, in Kerala the Sahitya Academy is not autonomous. We always talk about autonomy and freedom and democracy. In all these political parties are responsible. Each and every ministry, not only in Kerala, in most of the states it is like that. But the only one literary institution in India, that Sahitya Academy, is autonomous just because of Nehruvian understanding of democracy. That's the thing. And also secularism is also understood. And I have another observation. It's about it's a critical observation. See, there is you just mentioned about the failures also. Just mentioned as one of the great failure of great in quotes failure of Nehru, I think, is the issue of Kashmir. And he failed in the 50s itself. And Sheikh Abdullah was in jail. He was the real political leader there in jail. From there the cancer starts. Still now the cancer is spread. We cannot treat, it is not treatable now. And also I was reading about Mridula, that Sarabhai. I was reading her biography, biography. See, it is very sad. Such an important freedom fighter was in jail even when Nehru was the Prime Minister. That was one of the failures in the, not only the Nehru, the person, that is the problem of administration in India. That's the two observations I want.
Thank you. I think wonderful observations. I have something to add to that. Of course, on the failures, there are many. Even on secularism, there's a huge, one can develop a large number of. But then I think that's not important. I think today for us, I think how to regenerate secularism is the important question. Taking some clues from Nehru. Not that we very mechanically reenact the kind of secularism that Nehru tried to pursue. There are problems and that we need to address to those problems. The academy thing, I think Kamala Devi Chattopadhyaya was one of the most important persons, I think, who actually initiated this process of establishing Sahitya Academy, Nrityakala Academy, Sangeet Nataka Academy. And Kamala Devi Chattopadhyaya is a great friend of Nehru. And that it is, I think, Nehru has this tremendous capacity to recognize talents. Who can do what? So he saw Kamala Devi Chattopadhyaya as the most important, person who can actually initiate these kinds of very important. Yeah, that's right. But then, the point that I'm trying to say is that, so I think it's also, there is another, incident. I forgot about it. Recognizing talent. And then, Nehru recognized Lohia as a very important internationalist, somebody who can actually talk about the contradictions of a colonial world. And therefore he was made secretary to the External Affairs Department of the Congress. This is during the 1936 to 38. I mean, that's also something very important, in terms of, the vision of, because a leader should have that capacity, to see the talent and then recognize it and give it the right kind of thing. And the present collapse of whatever you are talking about, Sahitya Academy, it is natural when you build institutions with a great deal of effort, and then it is very easy to collapse them. Yeah. 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 Kashmir, I'm not an expert really. Yeah, yeah. Mutala yeah, yeah. 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 Ram Manohar Lohia himself was jailed several times during the Nehruvian period.
Also, if you have time, can you elaborate on this secularism that people should represent? You mentioned two kinds of secularism, right?
Yeah.
One state secularism that state has to do.
Yeah.
But the people one, can you elaborate on that?
Okay.
Because
See, since I worked on that particular issue, there were two kinds of debates, rather three kinds of debates on secularism in India. One is the debate during the Constituent Assembly, which was not in the name of secularism. The word secularism did not appear, but then it was basically about religious identity, religious communities, about the religious nature of religious freedom, whether it is personal or community, and all that. And Rajiv Bhargav is one of the best scholars that I think I have read. Talks about that, how there is already a grounding for secularism in. It's not that Nehru picked it from somewhere, from the West. That's the kind of accusation that is made of Nehru. From somewhere, from the West, he takes it. No, I think there is already a Indian foregrounding of the idea of secularism, which is in the Constituent Assembly. And then there was a debate in the 1960s, which is called the second debate on secularism, which basically revolved around the question of what the state should do. State secularism. That's what Rajiv Bhargav calls as political secularism. The state's responsibility with regard to religious quarrels, religious conflicts, religious violence, religious concessions that is given, etc., etc. What is the responsibility of the state? So secularism becomes some kind of a state ideology. Why should I and you bother about it? What should the state do? The responsibilities of the state, the failure of the state. So somewhere, I think the larger society was not part of this debate. And during the 1990s, which is called the third phase of the debate in secularism, where people like Ashish Nandi, T.N. Madan, Akhil Bilgrami, Javed Alam, Rajiv Bhargav, etc. were participants. Then this idea came up. Akhil Bilgrami has written an extensive piece on this variety of what's called civic secularism. Secularism from the level of the people. And that's what, I was trying to, I did not say that. I think the kind of secularism that is being propagated in Hindi cinema during the 50s and 60s is that kind of secularism. हम एक है, हम इंसान बनते हैं, इंसान बनना ज़रूरी है, representing, that Raj Kapoor song I forgot, ईसाई सबको मेरा सलाम, that kind of, all inclusive, religious, tolerant kind of secularism. So there has to be a certain kind of civic awareness about what are the principles of secularism. Whether what the state does or doesn't do is a different thing, but there is a community responsibility. There is a civil society responsibility of maintaining law and order, of maintaining peace, of maintaining love, maitri. That's the kind of thing that people talk about. It's not tolerance. Tolerance is very problematic, because you tolerate someone who you don't like. Yeah. So maitri. So that kind of thing. And that has taken place. Entire village comes together and say that we will not fight one another. We will, peace committees not established by the government, but I think by the people. So what are those civic areas of trust building? What are those areas of mutual help? So that kind. So Akhil Bilgrami's critique of Nehru was that Nehru built a very patronizing from the top kind of idea of secularism, from the state's responsibility, and never involved in a major way, which I am not very sure about it. But I think there is a necessity of building secularism at a different level, at the level of civil society. That's yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
During Bharat Jodo Yatra,
yeah.
we went to a village.
There was a conflict between two communities. They were not regarding a road. The other community was not allowed the other community to enter that area. But during Bharat Jodo Yatra, both the community leaders came together and they settled that issue. And peacefully, without court intervention, without bureaucratic intervention, peacefully they decided to settle this issue. So 45 years there was a conflict and people died in that violence and all. So it's in our Mysore,
I know.
Karnataka.
This has happened in the laboratory of Sangh Parivar, Mangalore also. Because we are so tired of this, during Ram Janma Bhoomi and after. There were certain villages, we said we have nothing to do with this. We are living peacefully here and don't intervene.
बहुत ये जो हुआ ना, first time in India's history, the Indian freedom movement is a biggest thing in Indian पूरा हिस्ट्री में देखेगा तो वही जो चीज़ है उसने जो लाया हमारे देश में, ये जो अभी बताया कि गांव-गांव में जो चक्कर है, कुछ भी लड़ाई है, वो बंद होने का. तो आई एम फ्रॉम सतारा डिस्ट्रिक्ट. हमारे उधर तो खुद का गवर्नमेंट था, मतलब क्या बोलते हैं उसको, नहीं पत्री सरकार, दैट इज पैरेलल गवर्नमेंट वाज देयर अगेंस्ट ब्रिटिश. उधर तो हम लोगों का बहुत सारा झगड़ा जो था वो निपटा दिया. माय मेन पॉइंट इज व्हेन देयर इज अ डेमोक्रेटाइजेशन ऑफ द सोसाइटी, कुछ चेंजेस जब लैंड रिलेशन में आए हैं जिस जगह पर, उधर डेमोक्रेसी का वैल्यू सिस्टम आया है. और अभी जो राहुल गांधी जी बोल रहे हैं मोहब्बत की दुकान, और मुझे लगता है कि वो बहुत अच्छा आइडिया है, बट उसको इम्प्लीमेंट करने के लिए वो चेंजेस नीचे वो बहुत जरूरी है. और यही हुआ है अंबेडकर का भी, वो थियरी का बहुत बहुत पूरा ऐसा सपना देखा है, बट नीचे चेंज लाने का कुछ नहीं है. तो हमारा मेन काम है ये टाइप का जो फेस्टिवल है, आइडियाज इधर से हमको लेके जाना चाहिए, लेकिन नीचे चेंजेस लाने का काम जो है वो हमको करना चाहिए. अदरवाइज नेहरू, अंबेडकर, गांधी, भगत सिंह, the great dreams of these people cannot be materialized.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And civic secularism is actually that process of democratization.
Yeah, but I still have doubts about that, I think, in the sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, I'm just thinking aloud. It's not thought out or anything, but that this kind of cultural, mushy kind of liking or secularism doesn't work, I feel. I don't know why. Maybe we can discuss later, but somehow, I mean, I'm just still thinking aloud because, like my grandfather's generation, they were all secular in Nehruian way, right? And they at least thought that all caste or we should tolerate religion or not flaunt our religion in public. At least that was like not decent. But now it's fully opposite. Like my grandchildren generation, they are into mata and all those things. But I feel that even they themselves, my grandfather's generation, they really didn't believe it inside. I mean, they were just, because that whole time was that kind of weather was going everywhere, so they kind of, that was the normative thing. But I think that thing should, I think that's important of the state work, I think. Because I can't just believe like the kindness of a neighbor all the time. I don't think so human beings are that great as a species, you know. I mean, I can't depend on that kindness. I feel that this normative, the first kind of state, the secularism, I think that should be very strong, and I feel that like
civic secularism is not the denial of the state secularism, but what happens when state itself becomes communal, state sponsored communal violence, as it happens in Gujarat, so then there has to be a civil society protest against it. So it's not that, again, that distinction is an analytical distinction, state and civil society. But then I think by civic secularism, at least Akhil Belgrami means, a certain kind of community initiative. And that requires a lot of democratization, as Maji has said. And that democratization requires a particular kind of value education, liberal education, which actually Nehru initiated in a very significant way.
Production systems too.
That is true. That is undeniable. We are all, we agree on that. I mean, incorrigible Marxists we are.
I think if nobody else has question. So we'll conclude this session, and we'll thank Rajaram Tolpadi for coming all the way, and also in such short notice. And it was really interesting. And I think because it's on art and dance and music and something political and something because how art is also political, so that way it's very useful. Thank you very much.